Thank you very much. I trust you can see my screen well.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Good. So thank you all for attending and for taking the time off to come and listen to this topic that's really close to my heart. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I really appreciate it. As has been said, I've got a multidisciplinary background, and my major publications in the recent times have been in archaeology, especially the evolution of modern humans from various perspectives. But I qualified as a music teacher before my life as an archaeologist, and I've always kept this interest in music and approached it from various aspects. So I was lucky to do a master's in music science in 2009 when I really wanted to start this interest in music off again. And I did this at the University of Stellenbosch. And since then, I've slowly published and worked on this topic with various collaborators. So my topic today is on the evolution of music and archaeoacoustics. So I will start with the evolution of music because it's the furthest back in time, and then go to archaeoacoustic and more recent examples of music archaeology. So as I've said in my introduction, I really do think that music might have been one of the most important things that we've done in our long evolutionary history. So hominins started evolving about 6-7 million years ago, and then various changes happened, and along the way we started communicating in musical ways, and I hope to talk a little bit and to share some insights on that with you. So why then music? Why this interest in music, and why do I think it's one of the most important things that we've ever done? This is because ethnomusicological and sociological research show that musical activity everywhere is central for human well-being. It's part of work, play, social life, etc., all those things that I mentioned there. So it's part of every ethnographic society ever recorded, and it's also part of almost all of the rituals that's undertaken by modern and recent societies. So this means that this is a universal social expression. Therefore, music is definitely more than evolutionary cheesecake. As Pinker has famously said, I think it is in 2005 that he said, music is not evolutionarily significant. It's like pleasure for the ears, and for the mind, it's evolutionary cheesecake. But as respected scholars such as Fitch has said, is that music is much more than this. It is a species typical trait of Homo sapiens. It's a cognitively complex and biologically grounded capacity.
Oh, frozen.
To what makes us human, and then archaeoacoustics, more recent links to past musicking. So when I talk about music, I mean musicking. And what is musicking? Music is a deliberate action. So many of us think of music as something that you put in the background when you drive in the car, or you sit in a concert hall, or you maybe go out and go to a rave if you still get raves. But you know, it is something you go out and very often don't participate in it. But small, and in each of my slides I have the references at the bottom that I hope you can see. He coined the term musicking to describe that there is no such thing as in music. Music is not an object or a thing that we can study. It is something that people do. So the significance of music, therefore, is not only in the acoustic traces that we are most familiar with, you and I. It is about doing music, and this understanding is essential when we study the evolutionary significance of music. I have to do some boring things to say what music is, definitions. So at the most simple, music is called organized sound. So Levitin wrote a popular book that some of you might know on music. What is music? Or, as Mython has famously said, I know it when I hear it. But if you want a definition that you actually can investigate scientifically, the following definition allows you to do that. It is an intentional action, as I've just explained about musical action or musicking, in which complex learned vocalizations are combined with the movement of the body in synchrony or in train to an acoustically generated beat. Whole body movements are involved. Right, so each of those phrases actually have a deep background in literature, linking it to music. I've just quoted a few references there for you, including my own work on the evolutionary origins of music, undertaken now more than 10 years ago. So one of the first aspects of what is music that I would like to address is song. So vocalization, as you might remember, is part of this definition of music. So what is song and how is it evolutionarily significant to humans? So song involves changes in pitch and interval in music, in melody. And very often people say, yeah, but dolphins, whales, and other animals, they can sing as well. There is, though, a difference between animal song and human song. Birds and humans are the most are organisms that actually store algorithms, or patterns of melodies in their brains, and then work with that, recombine it, and produce new melodies. But for humans, there's an added element is that they imitate novel sounds and change pitch at will. So humans are expert vocal learners because they modify the acoustic structure of vocalizations as a result of experience with others. So that's really important because humans as a group, they do sing and vocalize, but almost always in a social context, and they do change their vocalizations in terms of this social context. So this very beautiful picture I have there of two ladies singing is a very interesting publication by Meir et al., recently published in Science, that investigate ethnographically all songs from over the world, or as many as possible songs from over the world. It's a big data study. And what it interestingly found is that there are similarities in songs all around the world. If you're a muso, you will know that one of those similarities is that most songs end on the tonic. I won't go further, but that is one of the things. And these songs occur in the same kind of context: infant care, healing, dance, and love. I just want to get that away. What about dance? So dance is not as easy as it looks. This is a deeply conserved behavior in humans. You can dance because your body evolved in a certain way, and we'll get to the way in which bodies evolve, and because you've evolved the capability to keep the time, to move your body to a beat. This is called entrainment, or the coupling of synchronized movements. Again, animals can do ostensibly the same kind of thing. All of you have seen these nice pictures of parrots and cockatoos who move in rhythm with the time, but it's not the same as in humans. Crucially, in humans, we are able to generate the acoustic rhythm, as Brown 2022, his reference is at the bottom there, recently said. So we generate the acoustic rhythm in various ways. It can also be through song, and then entrain bodily movements to that. So dance is only motor behavior that's intentionally disciplined, that can be regarded as musical movement. So Hannah, also there at the bottom of the screen, has done wonderful work on what dance is and the importance of dance. As with vocal learning, dance is a group activity. As you can see from these two pictures that I've shown here, it's always groups of people that dance intentionally together in a variety of contexts. So I will just stick to those two aspects of evolved music. Of course, there's much more like pitch, timbre, etc., but it's not the topic of my talk today. It's quite general, and I want to talk about the evolved propensity of music. So one thing then, when you talk about the evolution of music, is the question: is music purely a cultural phenomenon or evolutionary cheesecake? Or is it a biologically evolved capability that enhances the fitness of the species? Is it either or could it be both? So in a perspective that's called the biocultural co-evolutionary perspective of the evolution of music, both these aspects are combined. And I wouldn't go into much depth, but I do recommend a recent or quite recent book by Gary Tomlinson, A Million Years of Music, in which he discusses this biocultural co-evolution of music. And what he says in short is that people live in a certain ecological environment. So that ecology needs to be incorporated in the evolutionary scenario. So organisms like humans impact on the environment, their cultural epicycles, like in that picture that you have there, the graph from his book, influence this, and this has an influence on the environment. So based on the science of oscillation, these oscillating aspects of culture and biology implicate or work with each other, and in such a way a new system self-organizes and emerge. So then the evolution of music is an emerging phenomenon. This is really in broad strokes. Then when you think of rhythmic music making, we as animals we are social animals, and we have the propensity to observe and emulate or mimic others. So this is an evolved capacity, so that we are almost conditioned to emulate. So when you dance and make music with another, your actions are synchronized with each other on the same scale as that of your neural impulses. So that's a huge jump to make. But actually, all those authors that I've mentioned down there do talk about the coupling in the sense of oscillating phenomena, coupling of movements, brain rhythm, and in the most extreme case, social systems with each other. And in this way, emerge into new forms of behavior. So through music making, neural circuits and your sensorimotor systems are coupled across multiple levels within a single dynamic system. So Freeman is a person that discusses this in more than one book, Neurodynamics, for example, and so is Camero, Radical Embodied Cognitive Science, which discusses this phenomenon of participatory evolution in various complex social phenomena, such as, for example, music. So as I've said in the previous slide, music then is a self-organizing process that has an influence in how we achieve synchronous mind states. So these very superficial slides actually is the top of a large iceberg on this kind of theory, which I just wanted to touch upon. I do think that this is important because there are different ways in which you can think of in human evolution. You might think that humans are hopeless actors and that evolution just happened to them, or that they are participating in the evolutionary process, but then also the ecology of humans and the environment plays a role in this. So which theories are there on the evolution of music? One of the most entertaining and interesting is the music-language hypothesis by Steve Mythen. It's already a book that came out in 2005, and he has the very interesting way to refer to proto-language or music-language. He calls it and it stands for holistic, manipulative, multimodal, musical, and mimetic. And each of those are actually underlined by, he discusses very well in his book about how each of these would have evolved. And he says that music as we know it today would have evolved from this kind of proto-musical ancestor that evolved due to selective pressures, favoring more complex forms of social behavior. So the musical proto-language would have had rhythmic, melodious vocal and bodily expressions in common with the music that we know today, and prosodic, and that's another way to say the emotional aspects of music common with modern language.
So musical ancestor.
Is there someone who wants to ask the question? Ellen's iPad. I'll continue.
Yeah,
Right.
please.
So then, another very interesting, more recent hypothesis is that by Dunbar. So you see these two images of people, a person and a orangutan laughing. And you do know that higher primates, such as orangutans and some chimpanzees, have laughter in common with humans. So laughter is a conserved behavior. So what does this have to do with the evolution of music? So what Dunbar has very interestingly suggested, and it's an hypothesis that he developed in more than one paper, for example, the one shown there at the bottom, is that he tried to find a solution for the problem of larger social groupings. So what primates do is that they live in certain sizes of social groups, but it's actually very stressful to live in social groups, and therefore you have to relieve the stress. Too much stress, too much cortisol. And what does primates do, like chimpanzees and orangutans? They groom each other physically. So this group size, Dunbar has said, is related to brain size. We know that brains evolved through time in hominin evolution, and here in and the Negeris Homo heidelbergensis, archaic Homo sapiens, brains enlarge quite significantly. And then the problem is the social group, according to Dunbar, would have then enlarged as well. How would they then deal with the stress of all this? He suggests that they used laughter to solve this problem, because when you laugh, more than one person get the endorphin hit. So laughter releases endorphins, and so does grooming in the way in which primates does it. So he do it. So he suggests that then hominins started using laughter to make the situation less stressful, and therefore they could have evolved their larger brains and then the related group size. So laughter was then used to lessen tension, and he equates that to wordless chorusing. Interestingly, is that human laughter evolved to be different from, for example, chimpanzee or orangutan laughter. That is because our pattern of breathing has changed. So we evolved conscious control of breathing. So we can laugh in several ha 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 in one exhalation, whereas your orangutan there would have had to laugh, ha, 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 like that, out, in, out, in. And there's actually a lot of biological evidence for this, and that this process happened in hominin evolution, possibly more than 500 or 500,000 years ago, or 500,000 years ago. So Dunbar then suggests that this evolved into vocal chorusing, and then on this basis, language and music evolved. So this is the second hypothesis that I find quite interesting, that is actually based on some biological evidence. The most interesting hypothesis for me, interestingly, is that of intersubjectivity that evolved through interactional synchrony. Now, for me, this is the most interesting hypothesis because there's the most biological evidence for this type of musical behavior that underlie our typical human expressions. There is an innate basis for coordinated rhythmic imitative behavior in humans, leading to intersubjectivity. And I'm reading this because intersubjectivity is possibly something that you're not so familiar with, but this is the ability to share another's lived experience. This is actually the basis of human sociality, our unique human sociality, and our larger social groups. So this innate basis is already shown in a newborn. And this is where this picture of the connected, this book or the film comes from. This capability is evolved. And so the form and the timing of body movements is an intersubjective dance of interaction, etc. And this is done to create trust and sharing of emotions, empathy, and coordination. So Trevathan and Moloch, they are very famous for this idea of intersubjectivity. More on intersubjectivity, that's innate. So it's known that interactions with newborns are marked by sustained mutual rhythmic synchrony, or we talked about your evolved propensity or capability for rhythmic expression, and this is where it starts. So the baby is born with this kind of capability to synchronize its movements and its actions with another human being. Their hands make expressive movements, even if the baby has been blind from birth. So this is done, as Trevathan is suggesting, to create and maintain interpersonal coordination or intersubjectivity. If there is something wrong with this capability in children, for example, this is the basis for several social problems and emotional problems that's experienced by individuals. So this interactional synchrony that I'm referring to is inborn or innate, as babies show near adult competence at this within 20 minutes of birth. So this is a newborn from India expressing interest in a red ball moved by another person in front of him. And this is, the baby is only 30 minutes old. So this research has started already in the early 2000s, and it's still continuing, as this publication by Shore shows. So intersubjectivity, interactional synchrony is one of the basis for our successful human communication, and that communication is musical because it involves rhythmic entrainment. Why then this picture of I've just said it's innate in our behavior. So I've mentioned that this dance between the caregiver and the baby is like an interpersonal synchrony involving the head, facial expressions, sound, but also the whole body. It's known that even chimpanzees has this capability, but there's one crucial difference, and that is that chimpanzees undertake facial imitation and not whole body synchronization, That seems to be a uniquely evolved human behavior. So this gets us into the preconditions for music, this rhythmic expression in interaction with a caregiver or another, involving the whole body, in a way, a dance. You might be familiar with the type of infant communication that's called motherese. Although it's motherese, it actually should be caregiverese, because the caregiver and a newborn baby has this give and take way of communicating with each other. It's a sing-song, rhythmic way of communicating, and this is the basis, as many scholars would say, of the way in which we communicate through language in a musical way. So I've skirted now very quickly about these evolutionary adaptations for musical expression and address that perhaps this might be involved in even the evolution of our language capabilities. So what is the fossil evidence that we do have for this? Brain sizes increased significantly by 300,000 years ago. I hope you can see my pointer, but I'm hoping you can. So in this picture, you can see that brains increase, or that this symbolizes that brains increase relative to body size significantly by 300,000 years ago, when Homo sapiens sapiens evolved, and even a little before that. Modern limb proportions is in place already by Homo erectus time. Here you have a picture of Homo erectus, and why this is important, you might recall that I referred to oscillations. So our typical way of human behavior involves walking on two legs, running on two legs in a rhythmic way. This was only possible since Homo erectus time. You have to remember that human bodies in evolutionary time have been built from the bottom up. So we are so human-centric, we do think that the brains came first, but actually the bodies came first. And so by Homo erectus time, this is about 2 million years ago already, bodies had the same proportion as we do today. Why that's important is that it is one can hypothesize, and some people do hypothesize, that the ways in which Homo erectus moved together in time, in hunting and other activities, was the basis for interactional synchrony, creating trust through coupling of neural and bodily movements, as I've explained before, the start of musical kinds of expressions, perhaps even language. But that is another discussion. Right, so that was in place already by 2 million years ago. Another crucial biological adaptation is the inner ears, the vestibular system. That is crucial because the vestibular system helps us to move, to control our movement in space. And those changes in the canal, in two of the canals of the vestibular system, evolved to its modern condition about 350,000 years ago. The picture at the bottom of the thoracic vertebrate channel, you might wonder, what is that doing that? That is a transverse cut through the nerve bodies. But that's important because these thoracic vertebrae innervate your intercostal muscles. So these are the muscles between the ribs and of the apparatus that control our breathing, as well as our tongues and so on. And this is what you need to control speech and the breath, your tongue and the breath consciously. So this is, we know that this part of the vertebrate channel enlarged between 1.5 million years and 350,000 years ago, right? So that's indirect evidence for increased innervation, possibly for the use of language, even perhaps for singing within that time time window. So all of this doesn't amount to a very clear picture, but it amounts to a hypothesis time period for us or our ancestors being typically able to sing and dance in the way that we do today, and perhaps even then evolve language from that basis. Although, as I've said, that is more speculative. So now I get to the second part of my talk. I have 45 minutes, right? So I've got 15 or so more minutes. So another way in which to approach this very interesting subject is almost from the other end of the time scale. Deep time archaeoacoustics or archaeological archaeoacoustics. I've just put down a definition of archaeoacoustics there for you on the basis of this very interesting recent literature review on what archaeoacoustics concern. So if you want to know about music in the past, one way to do this is through musical instruments and sound producing instruments, and then archaeoacoustics of places, or that's where the science is taking us at the moment. So what you might wonder, what is the oldest evidence for musical instruments in the world? These are actually two flutes, and both of them are from Lacke, Germany, found in caves from Germany. Interestingly, I won't go into the details here because I don't think I've got that much time left. But interesting, though, the oldest flute in Germany is associated with this beautiful Venus figurine. The flute was found, it's made from vulture bone in various pieces that Dr. Melina has put together. She has discovered that they actually do go together, and she's built the flute. The other very old flute dates to 36,800 years ago. It has 3 holes preserved, and for those of you who are interested in music, interestingly, it produces the pentatonic scale. So when you actually listen to sounds made by replicas from these instruments, it's really beautiful and quite haunting. Why is that interesting, or why do I address that? That is because I want to get to our own investigation into archaeoacoustics. So in 2017, I started a group, the ATEM, the Archaeological Transfrontier Music Work Group, and I'm pleased to say that some of my group members are in the talk, attending the talk. Thank you for listening. And so the goal for this was simply to try and find more evidence of music and sound production in the archaeological records. I wanted to increase knowledge from this perspective, from the other end. So here are the ATEM group members. Joshua Kumbani, who's completed his PhD with me, who is now in Spain. Justin Bradfield, he's a specialist in use trace analysis. Neil Rush is a specialist in ethnography and also various aspects of music production and music instrument production. He's done very interesting work on ancient sound from various perspectives, for example, rock gongs, and then Renee Rist, who is an expert on rock art. Neil and Renee are both, they're very knowledgeable on rock art, so then we pooled our knowledge to try and understand music production from various perspectives. So this is one of our first meetings held in my office in 2017. Oh yes, we've done various things, but I will focus on musical instruments that produce sound through setting vibrations in a body of air, like the flutes that we've seen. So we'll discuss flutes very shortly, and then also other kinds of aerophones like bull roarers. So through Neil and René's knowledge and research, we could identify flutes in 4 paintings from the Western Cape. So here is an anthropomorphic figure playing a flute, lying on his back. Super interesting. We won't go into this, but why is this done? What is going on in the rest of the site? Here is very easy. You can see a dancing group of figure, one of them playing a flute. Here is a human playing a 2-tube reed flute. To my knowledge, this is the first time that this has been seen in the rock art of Southern Africa. And then the well-known painting at Iseljachtspoort, where the figure in the middle probably holds a flute. So this is one way in which you can try and link to sound in the past. We're so used to looking at visual images and not taking sound and how you hear, and then the bodily experience of that into account. If you recall, it is this whole body experience, embodiment in music. Maybe I didn't emphasize it, but embodiment is one of the very important aspects in music evolution. So this perspective is then important right through. So we identified flutes in the rock art, published in this paper. And then the second kind of aerophone that I want to discuss are bull roarers. This is a type of aerophone that's mostly these days associated with Aboriginal people. They come in various shapes and sizes, and the Aboriginal people decorated in very interesting ways. So what is a bull roarer? It's a flat piece of wood, bone, or stone, or even a feather. It's connected to a string, and then it's swung in front of the body or above the head. I've got a video at the end that I hope shows, which will demonstrate this. So South Africa, through the work of Kirby, the wonderful work of Kirby, is known for various kind of musical expressions in ethnographic time, but specifically he records the use of the bull roarer and other kinds of aerophones. So, like I said, the bull roarer needn't be made in wood or bone. It can also be a feather. And the San people, for example, are known for using this kind of bull roarer. I'm showing here bull roarers from Africa that's currently in a museum in Oxford. It didn't fit in the previous slide, so I wanted to show all the ethnographic bull roarers. But what I actually want to show you is that bull roarers occur in many countries in the world, and this has been shown ethnographically. And then what about the archaeology? So unfortunately, of course, the evidence is not that numerous. The oldest bull roarers that we know of dates to the European Magdalenian, coming from France, and then the Mesolithic, a bull roarer from Denmark. And you've got pictures of them there. And a very interesting bull roarer from Norway, smaller in size, as you can see here, 2,800 before Christ. Now I'm linking from these bull roarers to our own country, to Mikey's River in the Southern Cape. It's a couple of kilometers from the closest town is Plettenberg Bay. What Mikey's River is a very large shell midden, 6 meters of shell midden deposit. If you can see my pointer, this is the length, this is the height of the shell midden originally. Of course, there has been a lot of erosion, so it does not exist in its original form anymore. There's only a remnant of it. Through a lot of work in which Jeanette Deacon, for example, was involved, a walkway has been built. So this site is open to the public. And thank you to Walk the Cape Blogspot, who put these pictures on their website. So this midden is 6 meters in height. It's of Holocene age. The oldest deposits, Shelmiden deposits, about 10,000, and the top ones a little bit more than 1,000 years ago. What's interesting about this site is that it contained many, many burials. It has been excavated since the 1930s by various individuals, and in those times there wasn't such a strict protocol for excavation. And so, unfortunately, the context of most of those burials have been lost. The human remains are stored in or kept in a museum in Bloemfontein, but unfortunately one cannot make out exactly which bone belongs with which, unfortunately, but at least they've recorded that there are these many burials. What I want to get at is that this site was probably an important ritual space due to all these burials, and very interesting stone tools as well as other artifacts, ornaments made in bone shell and ostrich eggshell. Some of these ornaments include these 4 so-called pendants that you see here, and a tusk, a boar tusk. That's at the very end of the picture. I have other pictures with a scale so that you can see for yourself more or less how large this is. And a very interesting on the other side of the picture, a painted stone. So this painted stone was associated with a grave in layer C, and these pendants as well. They also come from the so-called Wurtz layers. There are other gravestones as well in this site. Normally there are flat stones in association with burials, but not all of them are painted. So this is a very special artifact. Thanks to Ben Ludwig, from whose thesis I took these pictures. He is quoted here. So 4 of these implements had single holes and was recorded as pendants. So given our interest in past music and sound production and so on, we were wondering whether these were not perhaps bull roarers, because they in certain ways resemble bull roarers from other archaeological contexts. So it's something, as Justin Bradfield, one of our group members, regularly say, being a functional specialist, that we often equate form with function. But once you go deeper into the archaeology of objects, the function is not always what you think. So not all buttons with 2 holes were actually buttons. We know that some of these were musical instruments as well. What has been done here is that Neil Rush replicated these archaeological artifacts using sheep and giraffe bones. These were strung and spun by hand, as well as very cleverly by Neil, a machine that he made using an electric motor, because it's hard to spin these artifacts. Below there, I think it's Joshua spinning a replica of one of these artifacts at Glasses River, and it's really not easy. The sound was recorded by Simon Kohler, who generously gave of his time to help us. Right. So one of the objectives of doing this is we wanted to see what kind of useware is created by spinning these 4 replicas, and how does it compare to the archaeological artifacts. Of course, we could not use the archaeological artifacts because they are preserved and protected by law. Therefore, we needed to do this on replicas. And so, to make a long story short, is that in all the replicas that were spun, also there were 15 areas, useware developed in very specific places on the lateral sides. And when we looked at, and that's Joshua and Justin Bradfield, who kindly and generously trained Josh to do this, helped him to do the useware analysis, is that we saw on the laterals, the useware forms on the laterals. So from the 4 archaeological implements with the holes, only one of them had similar markings, and that is MR14 right at the bottom. And from that, we inferred that this was probably used, this one piece was probably used as a bull roarer. This piece is also bigger than the other piece. So it's this one here. It's bigger than the other pieces, and it resembles the shape and size of other of these kinds of bull roarers that you find in the archaeological record. So this was very interesting research, and we do think that we found the first bull roarer in the archaeological record of Southern Africa, dated to the Wilton time period, say around 7,000 years ago. This is interesting because I've just explained that Mikey's River was probably a very important spiritual ritual space. And if you listen to the sound that this bull roarer is making, and you take the sounds of the environment into account, one can imagine that this might have been part of the rituals undertaken in connection of these burials that were found at the site. This research is published in this paper. And then the final example of bull roarers that I want to refer to is a group of fine line paintings of bull roarers in Doring River. It's in the map at the bottom. It's the DR site, and it's in the Cederberg. So one of Neil's friends told him about this site and said, you have to come and look at this, see what we have here. So Neil went with his daughter and with a friend, and then they looked at it, and Neil took these photographs, enhanced them, and then took the next step by replicating these bull roarers using actually the dimensions that you can see on these pictures. This is his friend spinning a replica of the bull roarer at this site. And so this, we think, is the second instance of an archaeological bull roarer identified in Southern African prehistory or archaeology from this area. It's interesting that this is a group scene. Normally, we think of the utilization of bull roarers as something that's done individually, but here it has been done by a group. Here are the spectrograms of the bull roarer, and another ethnographic bull roarer, KK052 and MR40, the one just below it, is from our archaeological replica bull roarer, and then the bull roarer replicas made by Neil. So they all have the same pulse kind of output, but at different frequencies. And if you look at the literature, it falls exactly within the sound, the Hertz frequencies produced by various kinds of bull roarers. So this kind of bull roarer is also known as a huang. Neil would say this better. And we know now that this was used on figure and another kind of style. So this probably relates to a time period before herders arrived in Africa. One could imagine that, so this is from within the shelter where it was found. You can see it looks out on the landscape. So one can imagine that this might have been involved, perhaps, as Neil suggests, in rainmaking rituals or other kinds of rituals. This has been published in this, also in JIS reports, and then also in the conversation. So I want to end off by showing you work that we've done at Glacis River with Prof. Hannah Leroux, Dr. Sachabe Mape, Prof. Alex Skuman, and then Dr. Joshua Kumbani. So we went to Glacis River trying to replicate the sound within a cave, being a kind of ancient home, and trying to see what it sounded like. So this is just a very rough rendition, but it will give you some indication of what it sounds like within a cave. I can tell you from being there, So it is really a haunting sound, and if the sound is enhanced if you're within a cave. Also, when you listen to the sound, you can hear mostly environmental sounds, like a bird is very prominent, as well as the sound of the sea. So you can imagine that these sounds amalgamating to create a very special sonic and bodily experience in the past. That's the bird. And that's Joshua getting ready. Spinning this. Joshua is changing implements now. He's now getting the bull roarer. Excuse the interruption. That's Joshua. And Sachava will take over now. This is an unedited version. So then in conclusion, I feel as music is so pervasive in society currently and in the past and related to our innate traits, we need to research from music from as many perspectives as possible because it has psychological and sociological implications and clinical applications in modern society as well. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you to the Royal Society, Prof. Goldring, Sandra, and the Royal Society and RSSAf, as well as ATIM. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Sarah. That was an absolutely fascinating talk and a fascinating journey through all sorts of aspects of human behavior and sound and music. I found that amazing. For me, it's very interesting. As a biochemist, I look at patterns within molecules and how patterns change when molecules interact with each other. And the science that you look at is, and what you were describing, is patterns in human behavior and patterns in sound and then patterns of human development. It's interesting that as scientists, we're looking at patterns in all sorts of things we do. If people would like to ask some questions, please either put up your hand or ask a question in the chat. First of all, I was curious about the bull roarers. How big do they get? My understanding of how big they are is about thumb size to perhaps the diameter of a hand. How big do they get in the samples that you found and looked at?
I wanted to get to this. It was very slow here. So they're quite big. They go from 40 millimeters to, I have a place with dimensions. So from so big, about 40 millimeters, right? Some of them are longer than 30 centimeters. So between 4 centimeters and 30 centimeters. So it can be quite big.
The different materials that they're made from create different sounds, and the lengths create different tones, etc.
That's correct, yes. And so as we're suggesting, if you play them together as a group, that sound is enhanced, and it can become like a roar of an animal if you do that in the right area.
And do you think that these may have been used in additional to ritual events? Does the sound travel very far?
Yes, I think you can. Neil's in the audience, so he might want to have a word as well. But yes, sound does travel very far. So if you play it in the right place, in an area that has a lot of reverberation or echo, it travels extra far, and then the quality of the sound changes well. So there's research undertaken by Gold, Hahn, and others in Europe, in which they've done experiments by different kinds of sounds and how it's enhanced, so that it changes into something completely different, so that you wouldn't connect it even with this kind of sound when it's enhanced and then transported over the landscape.
I'm looking for questions in the chat. I don't see any. I'm looking for hands up. I'm curious about the development of ears in relation to human development, because that is crucial to, of course, hearing sound, etc., and how ear shape developed. Have you got any thoughts upon development of ear shape and sound, and then related to your story?
It's mostly the inner ear. That's related to rhythmic movement, but then also the way in which we hear is, of course, must have changed. I don't have much knowledge of that. I do know that the development of hearing is a conserved process, and our way of hearing is quite ancient, but it's how the brain actually produces or how the brain work with that sound that is unique in humans. So we can hear between 20 and 2000 hertz, if I'm not mistaken. And that is dependent on the way in which our middle ears are formed. The inner ear is related to our movement and, for example, rhythmic movement.
Unfortunately, when you were playing the video, the sounds didn't come through on, I thought it was just my computer, but it appears from some comments in the chat that the sound didn't come through.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Alongside the video.
I'm
But
really
perhaps what we could do is, this talk is being recorded and it's going to be loaded onto the Royal Society site. Perhaps we could add a copy of the sound video there so that people could look at it at the site later. Would you be happy to do that?
Absolutely, and I apologize. Not
at all. It's these things. If it isn't the video that gets stuck or the connection that goes wrong, it's. I don't think we've advanced terribly from many ages ago when I'm sure bull roarers broke in the middle of a ceremony. I'm sure our technology hasn't advanced very far. I'm just looking to see if there are any hands up.
I see
I've
Jill.
got a question.
Jasper Knight. Jasper, would you like to ask a question? Unmute yourself, please.
Yeah, thanks. So thanks a lot for that, Sarah. I was kicked out halfway through with load shedding, so I may have missed this. But I'm kind of wondering if, about the purpose of hominins making these sounds, these sort of rhythmic sounds. I mean, do you think it's kind of a mimicry of natural sounds? Are people trying to mimic the sounds that they hear in the natural environment, or is it an expression of a kind of difference, like that's them, we're us, we're different to those things outside our cave?
Right, okay. So there are those that suggest that the way in which we imitate, in which we make sounds, have evolved from our actions. So it's called effortful grunts. So in that way, it's related to our rhythmic movement. But what you are asking is, why did we imitate sounds, right?
Yeah, so I'm sort of wondering whether the purpose of producing sounds is to mimic the things that we hear in the natural environment, or
I
to
see.
distinguish ourselves from the natural environment.
Well, that could be. It could be, but it's mostly thought that the sounds that we mimic is of other conspecifics or other humans, and that we do that to communicate and to create trust between group members. So it could be, but if it is to distinguish ourselves from other animals, I don't know, Jasper. Interesting question.
I have a question. I haven't got a name registered, but can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, please.
I find it interesting that the same design is present in the Southern Cape and also in Norway, which suggests to me that there's some information that can be learned from the wide geographic spread of this instrument, and also the ethnological and physical changes that the users possess. You know, little sort of hunter-gatherer bushman through to, I don't know what the Norwegian guys look like, but probably giants. This thing has got such survival. It's survived for so long. How is this possible?
Well, it is. This is the wonders of archaeology. And so what we're seeing is just the tip of an iceberg. It's probably much more pervasive. And these instruments might even be much more numerous than we know, because most people, if they find that in the archaeological record, would say, these are pendants, and they wouldn't think of musical instruments. So yes, so the design is definitely shared worldwide, just as the design, for example, some stone artifacts is shared. So you find blades in almost all expressions of ancient lithic technology. So it is a phenomenon that certain designs are shared. But why it is, I don't know.
I believe Jill Richards had a hand up earlier and I missed it. Jill?
Yes,
Hi.
I'm just interested to ask, from a musical point of view, when you did your experiments with the bull roarers and the other things, did you try any musical experiments, or was it purely scientific research? I mean, experiments as in alternating or combining or doing that kind of music practice?
Yeah, so we were thinking, especially with the bull roarers, that could be used in a composition, but we haven't done those experiments, and the field is wide open. I think there's so much scope for that kind of thing, for thinking wider. So we just wanted with these publications to establish sound production, because that's new and hasn't been said before. Now it can be taken much further.
Thanks.
Sorry, there's a question in the chat. It says, do you consider period instruments a branch of archaeoacoustics?
Archaeoacoustics, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, the question was, do you consider period instruments a branch of archaeoacoustics?
Do I consider?
Period instruments, period in inverted commas, instruments a branch of archaeoacoustics.
Depends. Look, archaeology relates to material remains often older than 60,000 years ago. So yes, it depends on when your period would be, but it could be, yes.
And another question in the chat was, any ideas why flutes remained, but bull roarers seem to have gone extinct?
I think we can recognize flutes, but nobody's looking for bull roarers. And I don't think, oh, you mean why they remained? Okay. Yeah, I don't think bull roarers are actually extinct, because they're still used by the Australian Aborigines, and they're also used by some San groups that live in Namibia, or Khoisan groups that live in Namibia. It's just, I think that the ritual context in which these were used or are used are it's actually going extinct. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's not found so commonly, but there is a resurgence in interest in bull roarers. So if you go on internet, you'll see groups of people playing bull roarers and discussing it and so on.
Right, it remains for me on the behalf of the Royal Society and the Academy of Science South Africa to thank Professor Wurtz very much for her talk, and to clean up my screen, very much for her talk, and to, which I found absolutely fascinating, and it made me think about all sorts of other aspects of life that I hadn't thought about, which is something very special about these talks. I'd also like to thank Sandra, who sets up these talks from week to week. I'd like to thank those of you that were here and attended today. Sandra has a question. Sorry, Sandra, I missed your hand. Sandra?
Hi, Dean. Yeah, thanks. I was a bit late with that. I was in the. Thanks very much, Professor Wurtz. That was really so interesting, and like Dean, I'm sort of keen to know a hell of a lot more. But I had an experience recently. I was in the Eastern Cape near Colesberg, and somebody had found in a veld there these sort of acoustic rocks. So what it was, they were sort of vaguely in the same area, and one rock sort of balanced on top of the other. And what made it interesting is that there seemed to be points on the top rock that had been struck repeatedly. So it sort of suggested that there was some kind of ceremonial something that had happened there. I don't know if you've encountered anything like this, because I just found it fascinating. In fact, I was banging one of the rocks, and it was really quite interesting, the sound this rock was making.
Yeah, it's a well-known phenomenon. Those are rock gongs, and my colleague Neil Rush, he's working on them, and he's published several papers on this. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing that happens, that people make music from these rocks, and they're actually very sonorous, isn't it? And the sound carries over the landscape.
Yeah, that's absolutely wonderful.
Wonderful.
The other question I have, you were talking about the embodiment of music, and also speaking about the past and the sort of rather hauntingly beautiful sound that was produced by these various instruments, and moving from that to the whole sort of classical period where the music was quite sort of melodic. But today there's a lot of kind of discordant music. So what is it that has shifted within humans that now finds that appealing, as opposed to those lovely sounds of the past? I don't know if you have any ideas about that.
I think music, the kind of music that you refer to, is quite melodious, and that's kind of classical music that's really appreciated by one group. But cultural contexts and groups differ. I've read an anecdote that Beethoven was played to a group of sound people, and they said, "Switch it off, it's scratching sounds." It's I suppose how your ear gets used to it, and what you start perceiving as beautiful. So it's very much in the ear of the beholder. So it depends on very much your cultural group and what you regard as beautiful, to repeat. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Interesting. We'll have to get you back again for part 2. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, Professor Wurtz, for your talk. As I was saying, it's absolutely fascinating, and it's generated lots of different thoughts on different aspects of what we do. I'd also like to thank Sandra, who sets up these meetings. I'd like to remind you that the Royal Society will have further series of talks that will be organized next year, and we'll be sending you messages. Thank you very much for your participation today. Thank you very much for those of you who ask questions. That always enriches a talk and makes it ask questions that many of us are thinking of, and leads us in all sorts of interesting tracks and thoughts, and that's very much appreciated. And lastly, Sarah, we very much look forward to seeing some of your work in the future, and as Sandra suggested, perhaps we'll I'll be back again in a few years to hear how your adventures with archaeology and music have gone. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for attending. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I wish you, if you're traveling, thanks, have a safe trip home. If not, may you have a very pleasant break that is coming up. And we hope to see you next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean.